Not yet. Well, that's better. So, Happy New Year. Welcome to another year of live streaming from CG Spectrum, right here. My name is Scott Claus. I am going to be messing around with animation, 2D animation a little bit today. If you've ever been to one of these streams before, you know the drill. If you haven't, then very quickly, I'm a former animator from the 2D world, Disney, DreamWorks, that sort of thing, and also have done 3D animation, character work for DreamWorks and other studios, and then got into creature animation, worked on some big films. You can check out my profile at imdb.com. I promise I'm not going to name drop, even if you beg. No, that's I name drop all the time. So if you're interested in talking about anything that's related to animation, I'd love to discuss it with anyone. You can always chime in on the chats, and as long as you're keeping it civil and keeping it friendly and fun, I'm always happy to talk to people about any old thing they're interested in. Today's topic is going to be a little bit different. If you've chimed in on these before, usually I just sit and I draw and I talk about the scene I'm working on. If you have been here before, you may have been following the fact that I promised I would finish some things, and that having finished them, I would share them. Well, I have finished some things, like everyone out there who has been chiming in on these and leaves comments and talks about the things that they want to do, the projects and things. Of course, you were working on a project all this time, even though you weren't here talking to me on these streams, right? Well, I was working on projects all this time. So I'm going to share my project with you and talk not only about just finishing my project. Well, here, let me just pull it up so you can see what it is that I finished, in case you're interested. Not only am I going to talk about just finishing up the animation, I'm just going to sneak preview that. That's all I'm going to show it for now here. Stick it with that image. But I'm going to talk about effects and compositing and some of the more hard technical stuff that is involved in finishing a scene other than just drawing and painting. I'll talk about that a little bit too, but I want to talk just something a little bit different to start off the new year, and especially since this scene that I worked on has a lot of those elements in it, that I wanted to share something a little different and a little bit more technical and a little less about the drawing aspect that I usually do. And then next week, back to the regularly scheduled programming. I have a new scene that I have started that I think you guys are going to really enjoy. It's a little bit different for me, not quite in the usual style that I do. So I'm real excited about it and hope you guys have some fun. But yeah, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. And of course, I can't forget to bring my friend up. My friend's still here. He's going to do something really fun with Happy New Year and all that, and this is the best I could come up with. It's, yeah, really exciting, huh? Yeah, I know. See, that's now you know why the purple one looks like that. It's like, oh, really? That's the best you could do for Happy New Year? Yeah, well, we're not sure it's going to be a Happy New Year. No, it's going to be. It will be. We all know it's going to be a good New Year. So anyway, but yeah, so my friend is back. Yeah, Happy New Year. And so Classics AM, hello to you, and Happy New Year. Hope you're doing well. Hope everything's going right in your world. Had a wonderful break myself, and like I said, I spend it doing stuff like this. So anyway, I'll show this scene again. Yeah, purple guy looking up at it. I will show the scene again throughout this course of this stream, but like I said, I'm going to be talking mostly about effects and the node editor in Toon Boom and some compositing issues, and just, you know, what do you do when you're done with your scene? And then, as always, I'm perfectly happy to talk about, well, you know, how do I get a job? What do I put in a portfolio? How do I know when I've got enough stuff that's worthy of being shown? What are some of the things that I can do, you know, now that I've created some work and I want to share it with people? So happy to talk about all that and more. Always happy to talk about careers and career realities and things like that as well. But yeah, but the topic today is going to be mostly talking about effects and the node system in Toon Boom. So before I get into that, again, just ramping up slowly, I'm going to switch to work mode by Purple Thing, and I'll just hide this for a minute. And just started this a long time. Hey, Rushback. It has been a while, hasn't it? Thanks, you guys, for joining me in this happiest of New Year's 2021. It's going to be a good one. And you guys are going to be the secret to being a good one, because I know you're creating cool stuff or thinking about creating cool projects. But if you've been watching these, you know that I was working on this scene for a while. I had this little wizard character that was based on Avatar from the movie Wizards, an old 70s hippie thing. But I always really liked him. And he himself was kind of based on Mickey. And then I also have this scene with a little guy who looked like Dexter from Space Ace. And then the style I was going for was kind of a Don Bluethy Space Ace style. And then I'm a big fan of Wally Wood, who did this Batboy and Reuben thing, the masks and scrawny little, you know, really articulated characters with gloves and masks and blue hair and whatever. And so out of that, I created, I've been working on this scene now for a really long time, it seems, but out of that, I came up with this. And I'll play the whole thing again in a minute in case anybody missed it, but I just played it. But in case you don't remember, or in case you never did see, I've been working on this as a rough piece for a long time, mostly just the little dude with the spear and then the slug thing. And then I decided to add the wizard into it later. Just thought, oh, I'll combine them all and just make it into a little scene. So that's how they ended up in the same scene together. And I'll explain a little bit about that. But if you are curious about how these came together, if you want to know more about how they were animated, then you can look at the other streams if you like. I talked about it a lot. And thanks for being patient, anybody who joined me. So yeah, the process of building these in terms of animation has been going on for a long time. I didn't work on them every week, but I dragged it out for a long time. So anyways, well, you aren't the other guy that I saw this morning, this multi-person channel. No, I'm not. Sorry. And Rushback, hey. And Classics, yeah, Happy New Year. So yeah, so this is just a scene that I've been working on, and now it's done. And like I said, what I'd like to do is, now that it is done, go through a little bit and talk to you a little bit about some of the more technical stuff that was a part of finishing it off. So once more, just for the laughs, and as always too, I always forget to mention this, if there is something technically that's going odd, if you can't hear, can't see, if it's choppy, whatever, please don't hesitate to let me know, those of you who are out there and comfortable chatting. Sometimes things go awry technically and I don't always catch it. So yeah, if anything's looking weird, just let me know. And if you can't see or can't hear, if the music's too loud, that's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings. This is a school channel button. Oh, thanks for answering that question, Rushback. I appreciate it. So yeah, I'll let you chat amongst yourselves. Yes, CG Spectrum, and I'm the 2D person, the head of the 2D department, and we'll also be discussing 3D stuff in the future because I also do that, and creature effects. We'll see if I'm talking about that in the streams, or else I'm just going to confine this to 2D. We don't know yet, but that's certainly stuff that I have experience with, and I'm always happy to talk about. So if anybody's interested in CG animation, either character or creature, or if you don't even know what I'm talking about, that's a thing. But what we're talking about right now here is 2D animation. So yeah, I built these up in rough form. Like I said, that's been going on for a long, long time. I started with this one, which was the one who is supposed to look a little bit like Dexter. That's Dexter from Space Ace. So you can see the influence, or maybe a little bit like Batboy from Batboy and Reuben from this old 1950s cartoon. So that's where that came from. I used reference and plotted it out, did everything just the way we do in 2D. Then this monster thing, I was a little more loose with it. I think I still have the rough animation. Let me just double check in case anybody is interested. It's always fun to just kind of see the humble beginnings of something. So let me, I still have the rough stuff. So let me just show you how humble this was when it first started, while I'm talking about the process. And then I got that stuff up. So, well, here's this one anyway. So, let's get rid of that. No, not that. So the first thing that I did was I worked really, really rough, and then out of that came what I'll show you right now. So this is the rough of just the kid. That was based on live action reference. I did a really, really, really rough pass first, and then cleaned it up. And so again, I did that again and again, weeks and weeks and weeks of that. Everybody's seen that 1,000 times. Then let's see. There is not the creature. So anyway, whatever, you get the idea. But that's what I was doing with the rough stuff, and I've eliminated all that now, cleaned it up, did a nice final line, did that again, took weeks and weeks and weeks, and now that those two characters, I finished them off. The tentacles were on a separate layer from the body of the creature. So originally this is all I had. I just had the guy and he's fighting with the creature, and then that was all. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if I took the wizard that I've been working on for weeks and put him in the scene too? And so now this is a good question. Thanks, Rushback. You've been wanting to do 2D animations. This is a good school to go to. Well, let me plug. Yes, it's a good school. Well, thank you. Thanks to you guys for the support. So it isn't just me. We actually have other mentors as well, from various walks of the 2D animation industry. Some are a little more on the classic, Disney style animation bent. Some are a little bit more on the rigged animation, like you'd see, I don't know, I'm trying to think of good examples, but Steven Universe, Family Guy, it's sort of the more TV bouncy looking animation that you see on television programs. And then we're really excited to bring in somebody who's going to be talking about anime. That's coming this year as well, soon. We're going to advertise it soon, so if you're interested, you'll want to jump on it because it'll sell out fast. But yeah, so 2D encompasses a bunch of things, and one of the things we pride ourselves on is not only are we teaching 2D when a lot of people aren't yet, but we're teaching different styles. And so the people we have working are professionals who either are working in the industry or worked in it for a long time, like myself. And we cover a lot of stuff, the basics, and then the advanced. And the goal is to try and get you out there so that you can get a job doing this stuff. So, there are no promises ever, no guarantees, but we do have a really stellar group of mentors who work with you one-on-one. We talk directly to you. It's not like now where I'm just kind of just generally speaking to whoever's out there, it's one-on-one. It's a mentor. You get them time with them, and you get them to answer questions and help you with whatever. Yeah, so the thing about anime, everybody's very excited about it, and what I don't want to burst any bubbles or anything, but the truth of the matter is most anime artists know their stuff in a classical sense first, and then they apply the style of anime on top of that. So you learn how to do things in a very realistic, very anatomically sound way. And then because you're so good at doing that, then you apply the style, and that is how you get that look. So, some people want to jump right into it and want to skip the part where you learn about perspective and volume and how to construct things and how to be a fine artist. And you can't. You can try it. I certainly tried when I was young to just go directly to a style and not think too much about the fine art techniques. But even with the anime teacher that we're going to have, there is going to be a lot of the same material. I've had many talks with her, and we've kind of laughed where she's like, well, I'm a big fan of Disney, but I mean, she works in anime for a living and is a really wonderful artist and really talented and very personable, and we're real lucky to have her. And she's going to be adding that to our program, but it's still animation. I mean, it's a 2D animation program. So I don't want to mislead anyone into thinking that all they're going to be learning is, I want to get in there and do 2D anime stuff. It's like, no, it's 2D animation, but with someone who actually does that for a living. And like I said, it's going to probably sell out really fast. So keep your eye on it, and we'll let you know as soon as it's available to be taking students. And in his respects is, yes, it's going to be very limited. So yeah, so you want to be one of the people. If you want to be one of the people who gets in on that, then keep your eyes on the CG Spectrum. And I will certainly make mention of it as soon as I am able to, and let you know that that's coming up. But just know it's coming. It's coming real soon. So you want to be keeping track of what's going on with CG. Check the website often, and talk to people on the streams if that's something you're interested in, because that's how you'll find out about it. So anyway, but glad you're showing interest, and it's a great program. We've had some people go through. You're hearing endorsements even now in the chat, hopefully. So that's nice to hear as well. So glad to hear some positive feedback. So anyway, so I did this wizard in another scene and worked on it again for a long time. It's actually something I started a long time ago and rebuilt it. And the initial idea of it was just simply that it was just this wizard character. And like I said, I wanted it to be sort of Mickey Mouse with the floppy wizard's cap and the floppy sleeves and stuff. And so what I did was I just shot it out with an alpha background. That means that there was no background with the character, and then brought it into another scene and then placed it in the scene. I've done them all with brown outlines. It's a little bit softer than the other one. They're a little bit stronger, but as far as the line quality goes, but I thought, it doesn't bother me too much. The background is not mine, I will admit. Perfectly like to apologize to whoever did. I mean, it's Shutterstock. I described the background. I am not a background person. If you would like to do something like that, if that's where your bent lies, we have a great program in concept art too. It's a really, really strong department in the school. They really put you through the paces and get results. And I'm just thrilled whenever I check in and see what they're working on. So if that's something that you're interested in, you owe it to yourself to check it out, because it's, like I said, a really strong department at CG Spectrum. Anyway, so I brought these three characters in together, placed them on a background. You can see with Toon Boom, I just turn them on and off at will, and then they go away. Well, actually, I want to talk about that in a minute. So put them all in, and then said, well, now what am I going to do with it? What I'd like to do is I would like to have some shadows and highlights. So I will show the final product again. Let's get rid of my friend here. Sorry, you're distracting. So let me show you how it looks one more time so you can see, and then I'll talk about some of the stuff that I added that was specific to what I wanted to do with this scene and not necessarily the stuff that I just did in Toon Boom. So if you watch it, you may see, I'll make it a little bigger, you may see that it actually has tones and highlights and shadows and things. So here, I'll just cover me up. You don't need to see me anyway. But I'll just let that play for a minute, and you can see that there are tones, there are highlights, and the characters have shadows, and those tones and highlights are what's giving it that kind of three-dimensional look. That is a look that became really big in the 80s, at the end of the 80s, when Roger Rabbit movie that kind of changed animation forever when it came out. They added tones and highlights to make the animation characters look like they fit into a realistic background. And everybody went crazy for it. My first job in animation was working on commercials with one of the studios that worked on Roger Rabbit and was specializing in that sort of thing. We did commercials for like Rice Krispies and Tony the Tiger and I don't know what all else, and made them look like they fit into live action backgrounds with tones and highlights and other fancy effects. But it was all done analog. It was all done with, move this out of the way. It was all done by hand. So we'd go in and we would draw the tones, we'd draw the highlights, they would expose it using multiple passes on 35mm film. And it was very time consuming and it looked great, but it was what it was. It was 2D animation that was made to look 3D. It still looks nice. I still stand behind the work we did and think it's incredible. But nowadays, we don't have to go to those lengths necessarily. You still can, but in a case like this, I did not. I wanted to get some tones and highlights on these guys real fast. And so I used the node system, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Bot Central, you're out for the course. No worries. Yeah, no, I just prattle on and on, as anybody who's ever checked out these streams before knows. And I can talk actively about stuff you are interested, or I will just continue to go on with what I am showing you today, which is basically the scene and how I put it together and how you could put it together if you want to do something like this. So yeah, no offense taken. Just sit back, relax, and I will continue to talk about how the scene came together and some of the technical stuff that I did. Again, today it's more about technical stuff and a little bit less about the whole drawing, which is what I've done every week for months and will continue to do next week. But today I'm doing something just a little different. So anyway, so I had my characters in the scene and said, well, all right, then what are my options? Well, fortunately with Toon Boom, you have the option of being able to create shadows and highlights using this node system. I'm going to show you a rendered frame so you'll see what the final result is. And we can look at that in a little more detail and just talk about the elements in the scene one at a time. So if you look at this really closely now, you'll see that there's a shadow on the screen left side of the character, on the character's right side, and that there is a highlight, like a yellow highlight on the character's other side, on the character's left side. So a highlight on one side and shadow on the other. And as you play through the scene, you can't play through a scene when it's rendered. You can only look at individual frames. And I'll bounce around to different frames in a minute. But if you look at each frame, you can get an idea of how it adds a three-dimensional quality to it, and how the light plays off of the character in different ways depending on what the character's doing. It's all based on the lines that you drew, and it's also based on how you set up what's called a normal map. It's basically taking your drawing and turning it into a 3D blob. I'll show you that too if I can. And then lighting it based on that. And it depends on where you put the light and how much depth you're drawing that you've given to your drawing, and how intense the light is and what color it is and all that. But so I started with this character, and actually the first thing I did was I created a shadow, but that's maybe a little bit more intense to discuss. I don't know, for me it makes sense. It's like you take your drawing and then you turn it into something that's got depth, and then you cast lights on it, and then it will look like lights reflecting off of it. Now, how it manages to get all these cool details right is kind of mysterious to me. I mean, it's like a wonderful kind of magic. That, like I said, that would take us hours to draw, and then to blot it out so that it's a little bit fuzzy, so it looks like it's got a soft leading edge. It didn't get everything right, so you can see that the boot here, the characters, the screen right characters right leg in this shot, you know, it stops, and it wouldn't if it was really shadowed, then it would go all the way down. And then over here you can see that the shadow stops. It has a little bit of a taper, and then there's some blue color. So it's far from perfect. If you wanted to mess with it a lot and really give it everything you got, you would probably be able to get a lot better results. I was not interested in doing that. I just wanted to get quick tones and highlights as quickly as possible and finish the scene off and move on to the next one. I only do this for fun. I'm not doing this to try and get a job, not trying to do this to impress anybody. I'm just doing it to demonstrate stuff and have fun, and just you know, play around with things while I'm doing these live streams. So then there was the creature, and same thing. You can see these little highlights here. I chose yellow highlights because I thought I was going to put a glow into the character's eyes. I could have, I just didn't. I didn't feel it warranted. I might do it later, but ultimately, yeah, the character's eyes will probably glow, and that would explain why the highlight has got a yellow hint to it. That was the goal. I just didn't quite achieve that, and I'm sticking to it. I don't really care, at least not yet. Future projects, I'll probably try to sort some of that stuff out and really knock something out. The next one I'm doing, I'm probably going to spend a lot more time and energy. You'll see. Tune in next week if you want to know what I'm talking about. I'm working up something that I think you guys will like. It's very interesting, dynamic visually, that is a kind of current look. This is, you know, this is a little more old-fashioned look, but that was the goal. Anyway, that you can see that the highlight on the left and then the shadow on the right, it gave this dimensional quality. So now it looks like these little things, the antenna, whatever, they have three-dimensional quality to them. And that's one of the advantages of using the tones and highlights, is it gives it dimension. And then one of the advantages of doing it in Toon Boom is that it's pretty easy to set up. So I'll show you that in a minute. Now this is the one that blew me away. So this wasn't actually drawn in, I mean, it was drawn in another session of Toon Boom, and then I imported it into After Effects to give it an alpha background, and meaning I got rid of the background and had made it clear so that when I brought it into another Toon Boom session, it would be free and clear. There wouldn't have anything attached to it. Let's see if I can find it. I think it's the top level. There's a lot of junk in here, and I don't want to spend too much time searching for stuff. So I'll just quickly look and see if I can find it. Yeah, so there's the wizard, and the wizard is just this. So it's just a layer. I'm gonna take it off of the rendered view just for a second. It makes it faster and easier to move around. So it's basically just a layer like anything else. But what's interesting about it is that the other things, the other elements in the scene, you know, were drawn in After Effects. Sorry, drawn in Toon Boom, and so their line art is in there. The paint that I used to paint the colors, everything is in there, and Toon Boom can draw on that to help try and figure out how to create shadows and tones and highlights and things. This is just the equivalent of a PNG. It's like bringing a PNG into Photoshop or something. It has no definition. It's just, it's a drawing that exists as one single unit. There are no multiple parts. It is just the animation on one layer, like a layer of glass, basically painted onto a layer of glass and then placed in the scene. But lo and behold, if I render it out again, you'll see that when I applied tones and highlights to it, just like anything else, it did a pretty good job. It's not perfect. Of the three of them, this one ended up being the more problematic. I didn't get a lot of great detail out of it, but when you see it play, you'll see that it does have a bit of a dimensional quality to it. it would have taken me hours and hours and hours to go in there and paint highlights and paint shadows and make sure that everything was on the right side of the character and had a nice soft round leading edge to it. Not to mention the shadow, which you can't really see in the background, but there is a shadow there. I'll make that a little more obvious later. But so those were the tones and the highlights. The shadows, on the other hand, was another node plugin, node situation that I'll point out in just a minute. But the basis of that is basically you're copying your character and then manipulating the image so that it looks like it's laid out flat, and then it's colored so that it's dark. So it's basically just a copy of the character. You make 2 copies of the character, and then one is now going to be laying down flat on the ground and doing everything that the one that was just facing the screen is doing, but doing it flat on the ground so it mimics a shadow, and then it's colored sort of a soft dark color so that you don't see any of the details as you wouldn't in a shadow. You just see a silhouette. And again, just takes minutes to set that up once you know how. It's tricky when you encounter this for the first time because there are a few little philosophies and things that can be sort of it's like anything. When it's new, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and you have to spend some time with it. And that's one thing that I urge anybody out there who is learning right now is be sure and factor in the fact that it takes a long time to learn stuff. If you want to be good at something, it takes a while. And if it comes quickly, that's probably because anybody can do it. So if you push a button and something happens, well, anybody could push that button and make it happen. And at that point, it's not worth a lot. It may be fun and exciting initially, and I do it all the time, but after a while, it's not something that is going to impress anybody. And so you want to learn how to do things. You want to take the time, make mistakes, fumble around, which I did a lot of over the break, and learn what's this other scene that I'm going to bring in next time. And learn some of the stuff that you need to learn in order to be able to replicate stuff and do it your way and make it happen exactly the way you want it to. And then you can keep doing it and get a job if that's what you want to do. Anyway, so I had 3 characters, 3 sets of tones and highlights, and 3 sets of shadows. I decided to go ahead and just have them all take place in this scene. Toon Boom, you can kind of use it as a compositing software. You can put different elements together and put them all together. That's compositing. Put them all together into one scene. It's a pretty good entry-level job too. I don't know if it still is, but it used to be a compositor and put elements together. But you could also do it in another program. And so what I did was I took all this stuff, rendered it out from Toon Boom, and then went into After Effects. I'll bring this down again. And that's how I got the sparkles. I didn't spend a lot of time. Those are basic, right out of the box sparkles. I didn't do anything to them. It's just particles in After Effects, and had them animate. And given more interest in this or more time or whatever, I would probably go back and, like I said, I'd give the beast glowing eyes. I would really spend some time on those particle effects and make it look real pretty. Probably I would redo some of the shadows. I might do them by hand and fix them up. Well, I don't know, but the shadows seem to be working all right. I probably would give the green creature, definitely I would animate the shadows. I'd like to give that thing more detail, like some spots or something that, break it up so it's not just one solid color. But again, I just do this stuff for fun. Anybody who's been watching these for a while knows I've been working on these for a long time. I also don't do this all day, every day. I just do it a few hours a week, 2-3 hours a week or more. And then I do other scenes as well when I'm doing these Twitch sessions, so it doesn't get too dull. But it takes a long time. So does it warrant going in and doing a lot more on this? Nah, probably not. It's a one-note joke. It's just 3 creatures and they're doing their thing. Like I said, next week I'll be starting on another one for you to kind of watch me take it from beginning to the end. A little more simple, not quite as complex as this one. This one didn't start out complex, but it sure got that way. But I'm proud of it. I'm not I'm not tearing it down, but it's just, it is what it is. It was meant to be fun and cute and sort of old school. So I'm not going to spend a lot more time adding things to it and perfecting things. Where if you want to get a job, if you want to put something on your reel, you really got to bring your, I hate these expressions, you have to bring your A game. You have to really give it everything you have. You have to put the time in and make sure it looks exactly the way you wanted it to before you say, hey, will you hire me to do this for a living? Okay. I can't pronounce your lesson, but welcome here. Which software do you prefer, TV Paint or Toon Boom? Pros and cons of using. I'm not a TV person. I don't have anything against it. I just haven't used it. So the reason that we use Toon Boom for the CG Spectrum is because it has the ability to do trace in place. I've demonstrated that in other streams. And I'm not really set up to show that off today, but what it basically amounts to is I can take, here, I'll just go wide, you can look at the animation again. So let's say that I have a drawing of a hand, and I want to have another hand that's going to be opposite. To draw those two freehand, to just draw this one and then just draw this one and just try and guess and make sure that they're going to be the right shape and the right size, the volumes will stay the same. It's really hard. It's not easy to draw this hand and then this hand and make sure that those two are the same volume. With Toon Boom, you can take the drawing of this hand and take it off the pegs, they call it, move it over to this hand and compare and contrast the shapes and sizes of the fingers, just like you would if you had two pieces of paper. If I had two pieces of paper, I could take one of them, put them over the other, and put light behind it, and I could kind of look at it and go, okay, yeah, I can see that the finger shapes are not quite the same, and I need to fix one of them. Well, you can do that with Toon Boom. Take drawings off the peg, place them on top of each other, rotate them around, and line them up so that everything looks like it's the same volume, the same shape. And that is one of the main selling points that I think you find with Toon Boom. I'm not a salesman for the company. I'm fairly new to it myself. I'm far from being an expert. We have experts at CG Spectrum. We've got somebody who just got certified, and then two others who've taught it, just taught Toon Boom as an animation program to people. So we have those resources at the school, and I rely on them heavily. But they assure me that that is one of the benefits of Toon Boom, is that you have that ability to trace in place. Again, I don't use TV Paint, so I don't know how it measures up. But boy, Toon Boom does a lot. It's crazy what it does. And again, I'm going to show some of those things in a minute, some of the things I did with effects. But I'm not 100% sure TV Paint doesn't do that. I would suspect that the difference between some programs out there is that some of them eliminate a lot of the technical stuff that you don't need. So Toon Boom does a lot. I teach Maya as well, or I have taught Maya, and Maya is a CG animation program, and I've also taught After Effects. And the reason that these programs end up being tough for people is that they're not intuitive. You don't just sit down and draw. You don't just sit down and composite something and get cool effects. And in Maya, you don't just sit down and people always say, ooh, am I going to learn how to create a character and rig it and then animate it and light it and make my own short? It's like, that's a really tall order for a class. And most people, it's like they spend all their time just lighting. That's all they know how to do in Maya. Or all I knew to do is rigging somebody else. I knew somebody early in my career in CG animation, and all he did was rig animation characters. He didn't even want to animate them, which I found amazing. He said, well, once I've rigged it, that fun's over for me. And so I suspect that might be the case with Toon Boom. It does so much, and that's one of the reasons it's a complicated program, is because it does so many things. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what do I want? Do I want the top of the line, high-end, complicated program that I will grow into, but that will be really difficult at first? Or do I want to just sit down and start drawing? Frankly, if that's all you want to do, you could do it with Photoshop. You can use Photoshop Motion. You can even animate like that in After Effects. You could conceivably, I don't know why you would, but you could conceivably do a bunch of drawings in another program, bring them into After Effects and have them run at speed and change the timing of it and play with it. Again, I don't know why you'd want to, but same thing with Photoshop. I don't know why you'd want to use a program that isn't really set up for that, but you can do it if that's all you got. But my advice is, to answer your question in a really vague way, is it's just important that you start somewhere. You need to have at least one of these programs underneath your belt, as we used to say. It's an old-fashioned phrase. You need to have your hands on something. So once you've learned one of these programs, and when someone says, oh, well, the new kid on the block is Groovimation or something, I don't know, Dynamation, whatever, just making stuff up. But you know, there's a new program on the block, and now we do it this way. So you need to be able to take what you know about animation in general as an animation artist, and now use this program to accomplish it, whereas before you were familiar with this. Good examples like Flash. Some people still remember Flash. It's not been that long. In fact, some people still use it, I think. Then it turned into Animate CC, and when it changed, you know, there were some changes that happened, and some people didn't like those changes. Some people went along with it just fine. The people who survive, who keep jobs, are people who are excited about what's happening in the world and keep tabs on things. It doesn't mean that you have to go chasing every new software that comes out. That's why I say it's just important that you start somewhere. You need to learn about timelines and layers, layer stacks, toolbars. Again, unless you've been living, I don't want to insult anyone, but most people have grown up with computers, who are interested in this stuff nowadays. And so they know a lot about the basics of software programs, but there's always more to learn. And so you just need to start somewhere, and then you can determine what tools you need and what program would be best suited. Unfortunately, in a program before you realize it's not what you wanted. Unfortunately, you invest in one and then you find out that the job that you're looking for, they don't use that one, they use the other one or something. It doesn't hurt to do some research. If you're interested in something, go out and figure out, well, what do they use to create it? And that's going to be your best bet for figuring out, well, how should I specialize? There are people who are still using old versions of software programs, proprietary versions that they've frozen in time. They don't keep updating them because they work. Everything's going great. And I personally, the minute I learned Maya, which was an incredibly complicated program, it took me a couple of years before I got hired to work in that program. No sooner had I learned that than they bumped me onto another project over the hedge at DreamWorks and had me learn this thing called EMO, E-M-O, which sounds kind of funny now, but at the time there was no emo in the scene sense. It was just the letters EMO. I don't remember what it stood for. Maybe somebody knows. And they said, well, you got to learn it if you want to work on Over the Hedge, and that's the only thing we have for you to work on at the studio. So if you want to work on that, and they said, we'll train you, but you're going to have to pick it up real fast. And so a bunch of us learned EMO, which was very different from Maya, a different way of animating. And then that eventually became Primo, which is what they use at DreamWorks now to this day, as far as I still can recall. So I had to learn EMO, and then I was also learning Flash. And then when I left DreamWorks, I went to another studio who had a proprietary version. That means a version that they built themselves based on another program at Rhythm and Hues, and it was called Voodoo. And so it was basically Maya from about 2006, but they had gone off in another direction with it and made it their own, so they didn't have to keep paying licensing software, licensing fees. And then they kept updating it from there in their own way. And so I had to learn that. And then when I was done with Rhythm and Hues, after I left there, after Life of Pi and Percy Jackson and the Sea of whatever, after that, then I had to go back to Maya again. And Maya had been updated since I hadn't worked in it exclusively for 7 years or so, and had to go back and relearn everything about Maya that I'd either forgotten or had been updated. The first time I saw the new Maya, quote unquote, the way it looked in the new way I hadn't seen in many years. I had a friend who was working on Tangled at Disney, and I was looking at Maya on her desk. I was like, I don't even recognize that program anymore. It definitely doesn't look like the Maya-based program I was working in, which was Voodoo. So it's a long way around to kind of say that it isn't as important that you are a master of any particular software as it is that you have an understanding of how to do this stuff in a general sense and can adapt depending on the changing moods of the industry. Now, all of that, of course, is probably going out the window with Unreal. If you have any interest in this sort of high-end gaming specifically, but high-end realistic real-time graphics, well, you know, it probably is going to be in your best interest to understand that program, even if you can't navigate it too well, even if you can't do anything with it. But you know what it is, you know what the lingo is, you know how to, you know it when you see it, if that's a direction you want to go in. And things will undoubtedly be shooting off from there in the near future. So that's the new kid on the block as far as I know. And it's something I don't know to what level they offer it at CG Spectrum, but it's something that everybody's interested in, everybody's excited about. And wouldn't it be great to be somebody who's on the ground floor of knowing how to do that and sharing it? So anyway, so I hope that answers your question. It's a lot of information about a lot of different things when the question was TV Paint or Toon Boom. But my answer, I said it right from the start, was Toon Boom because that's the one I know. And I don't know a lot about TV Paint, and I would not be the person to say you shouldn't use it or one's better than the other. Just pick one up, start playing around with it, and it's a tool. It's a tool for you to express yourself, and that's what you need to keep thinking in the back of your mind as you go through all this. Is unless you want to be a programmer, unless you want to be building software, you're not as interested in the tool as you are in the results of using the tool. So just some stuff to think about, just some food for thought as you keep your eye on the prize, whatever that prize is. So, all right. Now back to Toon Boom. Again, just interrupt me anytime and ask questions. That's what I'm here for. So let me shut this down. Let's get a rendered view that's kind of cool. That one will do. So I just wanted to talk again today a little bit about the node views. So you can see it right up here in the right side of my screen. Up in the upper top corner it says node view. And then I open up this Waking Nightmare, and you can see that these are nodes. So some people, you know, encountering this are like, oh no, I know exactly what that is. I've seen that a million times. Some people not so much. It reminds me a little bit of the first time I saw the curve editor in Maya, and I just went, oh no. I mean, I really, had just finished drawing Sinbad. That was the last 2D movie I worked on before everything switched to CG animation, and I went with it. And suddenly, you know, having to adapt to this very technical word. I mean, this looks like something out of the Matrix, right? And you're just like, I just want to draw. That's all I want to do. Hey, there's room for people who just want to draw too. You don't need to know this stuff. You don't need to be an expert in this stuff, I guess is what I'd say. But it's there, and it's part of what we teach at the school if you're something you're interested in. So I'm just giving you a little sneak preview today. So what is the node system? What does it do? Well, basically it takes all the elements that make a scene and then composites it, there's that word, composites it, into a final output, which is what you see down here, which is this display. So that's basically what you're looking at when you see the movie, which I might as well just show it again. When you're looking at this, you're looking at the final output, the final display, the final rendered version of it, if you want to call it that. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at the display. But in order to have a display, we have what I like to think of as kind of like a bus terminal, where all the buses come in and stop or keep going. It's like a bus station or a train station or an airplane terminal or something, airport. And so all these elements are coming into the airport, aka composite node, and then some of them move on and keep going, and then some of them don't. and some of them just stop there. So this composite is something that just comes. I mean, you can't have anything visible unless you have it something that's like a composite, or something in your scene basically has to be there in order for things to be visible. And then everything else plugs in to that composite. These are all the airplanes flying around, I guess. It's a dumb analogy, but you get the idea. All these they're basically what they are, they're nodes. And these nodes are plugged in to this composite and then spit out as a final display. And so what are some of the things that you see? Well, you see the paint that I used. You see the color card that I used, which I'm no longer using, and the background. So it's probably the easiest one, is that the background goes directly into this composite terminal node, and it's attached by this noodly looking thing. If I unattach it, let's see what happens. Does the image go away? No, it doesn't. So whatever. But if I re-rendered it, it probably would. But that's how you attach things to and from the composite, so that you can see them, so that you can interact with them. I probably can demonstrate that with one of the shadows, because if you put the shadow in the wrong place, it'll re-render it and it won't look right. Or maybe one of the highlights. I'll just mess around with that. Let's see if we can break this thing. I always feel like that's a good way to demonstrate stuff, is just break it, and then by trying to figure out what broke and what went wrong, you can learn something about it. So here we have the shadow, and then once I selected it, you can see it's dark now. So if I move it to a different position, let's see what happens. See if I'll break it, and it won't. Yeah, so you can see that the shadow is affected. I'll undo that. See how it's darker now? And then if I move it over, it's lighter. What happens if I just rip it out? Gone. There we go. So that's what I was trying to show a second ago. So unless it's hooked up, you won't see it. And the way to see it, the way to hook it up, is I just grabbed from one of these ends. You can see it's trying to hook up to other things. It's like, oh, where, let me in, let me in. And like, no, I want you to hook up right here to the composite terminal node, and then that is how I can see the shadows. I'll undo it, put it back the way it was. Doesn't look that much different, but so that's kind of an overview of just basically how the node system works. Is you've got all these nodes, all these individual commands, if you will. Each one of these nodes is just saying, do something, and then by stringing them together with the equivalent of old analog chords, then you can build up layers and layers of different detail with things that are provided for you in Toon Boom, which I'll show you in just a moment. But a question: does having a 2D animation background help with animating at Maya? Well, it certainly helps for me. I was going to say it hurt. It certainly helped. What I was going to say was it didn't hurt. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this with conviction, which is animation, and whether you do it with clay or paper cutouts, or if you're drawing on your hand and snapping a shot of it every frame as you draw a pen, that's line that's crawling up your face. Whatever you do with motion graphics, the laws of motion and the laws of replicating motion one frame at a time don't really change. I know some of the biggest heavy hitters in the animation world, even today, like James Baxter. He was a master 2D animator before he became a master CG animator. And then others that I worked with went similar routes. A lot of 2D animators that were masters of their craft in the early 2000s, when everything switched over to 3D animation, unfortunately, because I think there's room for both. But when that happened, some of them took to it really well, some of them just didn't. Computer animation, Maya in particular, requires a certain amount of I don't remember if it's left brain or right brain. I should know that by now, but there's one side of your brain that's more creative and one side that's a little more scientific, analytical, and likes numbers and problem solving and things. And so you got to have both of those if you want to animate in a digital realm. Well, now everything is digital. So Toon Boom is digital. It's a digital animation platform. And in order to get around, you have to understand how to turn on a program and set up your drawings and draw on a digital drawing pad or something. And then do a little bit of what I'm talking about today. Get that off. That's kind of awkward. So I think the important thing to remember is that animation is animation, no matter what medium you're using. And what I was saying just a minute ago still holds, which is it's a tool. Whichever software, whichever tool you're using, if it's you want to do like Leica and you want to make puppet style animation, well, they're using digital enhancement. I mean, not so much enhancement, but like reference. They're checking their work by shooting digital versions. I was actually, when I was out of work for a little while in 2013 or so, I applied for a job there. I was thinking of going back to where I came from in Oregon and working for Leica, doing digital supplementary stuff as a digital animator while they were doing the main stuff, which was stop motion, one frame at a time, puppet stuff. So it's gotten a lot more integral. I don't know that it's possible to do anything that's non-digital anymore unless you're just doing it for fun. You're not, but if you're working in the industry, then it's all digital in one way or another, and you have to just get used to it. Most of the things you do on a job are very limited to, you're doing a specific set of skills, and you're not required to do different things all day, every day. When you're making your own short films at home, you have to do everything. You have to be the producer, director, concept artist, animator, compositor, visual effects person, everything. But it's just good form to be able to do all that stuff. Be a jack of all trades, master of whatever you're most interested in. But everything helps. So to answer your question, yeah, definitely knowing 2D animation would help you become a better Maya animator. I knew a lot of people who never went through 2D animation and just jumped right into CG right out of school. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do that too. The people who don't know how to draw at all, but they're still really good animators in the CG environment. It's a slightly different, it's a vastly different discipline to think in terms of 3 dimensions and rotating things and animating from different angles and animating using the specific style that you use with Maya. Whereas with 2D animation, it's another very specific set of skills of drawing something frame by frame. Or in the case of rigged 2D animation, knowing how that rig is set up and being able to animate in a way to make it look specific. So I just think it all helps. It's all good. And if you're interested in this stuff, you should be pursuing it from all different angles. And don't make the mistake I made, which is only focusing on the stuff that you like. Get a good broad base of different styles and different techniques, because tastes change. And you don't want to be one of those people who's stuck with one style, which again, the stuff that I did for the stream today, it's kind of old fashioned. It reminds you of stuff you've seen from, I don't know, the 80s or whatever. You don't want that to be a burden. You want it to be a choice. And so the more skill you have, the more versatile you are as far as an artist, the better your chances are going to be of being able to adapt to new technologies, to new styles, to different working methods. So now, I already answered this, but it's a question: do I have to be a 2D animator before I do animate in Maya? And it's like, no. I've known dozens of people who didn't touch 2D. And 2D was kind of a done deal for a long time, starting from about, 2004, roughly 2003. 2D as a medium for feature animated films was pretty much done. And then it began to be revived, or never really went away in TV. But it's a different style. 2D animation in television and in anime is different than the style that we were doing at Disney and DreamWorks. And that style did go away for a long time, and has kind of been revived recently with things like Klaus. And I don't know, you guys probably know more about this stuff than I do at this point, but so it's almost gone reverse. It's like, well, do you need to be able to do 3D animation before you can do 2D? I think it's probably much easier to go from being a 2D animator to doing CG than going the other way around, because you have to learn drawing skills if you want to be a 2D artist, whether it's animation or anything. And so, yeah, so you don't have to do anything. I know people are geniuses in both exclusively, but I say that the more the better. Try clay sculpting, try messing around with puppets and shooting it one frame at a time. Try flip books, which is how I started out in life. It's all, you know, it's all part of training your brain to look at things one frame at a time in motion graphics. So that's good questions, though. Thank you. Thanks for asking these thought-provoking questions. All right, so I've got all these nodes set up on my screen, and it looks like a bunch of spaghetti. I'll explain a little bit more detail in a minute how you can use this stuff, and that's kind of my goal, is to be able to say by the end of this, theoretically, if you wanted to, you could put something together yourself and create shadows or whatever in your Toon Boom session. But what we're looking at is there's a library of things that you can use, and the best way to get to them is you can just start typing into the search window. And so you can look for things like shadow, shade, there's a light shader, there's a tone shader, and then there's actually a tone. And so there's all sorts of different ways that you can create tones and highlights in Toon Boom. And I chose the easiest, I chose the fastest and simplest, but you could create mats. So there's this cutter tool, so you could actually create like a mat that would go over the top of your character and would hide the outside edges, so you could, you know, just paint your shadows on. If there's anything else exciting in here, but this is where you go to find all the different nodes that you use to create special effects. And special effects are basically amount to anything that is above and beyond what you're just drawing in your scene or painting. I guess that's the best way to put it. And there's more than I could cover if I sat here for the next 5 years in order to get up to the expert level at it. It's just stuff where what I like to think about with After Effects, and even with Maya, and certainly with Toon Boom, is at a certain point you've got a problem. How do I do this? How do I solve this? The easiest way to learn something is I have a problem and I need to solve it. I need to figure out how to get my character to look a certain way. In my case, it's like, if you were looking at it as a problem, you say, well, I need tones and highlights and shadows. How do I create tones and highlights and shadows? Well, I've got all these cool nodes, and I've got a normal map, and a light shader and a tone shader and a volume object, and putting those things together, I might be able to create something that is a three-dimensional object that has light cast on it. And then once I've got that set up, and go from there. But anyway, the point is just that there's all this cool stuff inside of Toon Boom that can be found if you open up the library, the node library, and look. It's not very intuitive, and so you need probably a tutorial or a mentor like you might find at CG Spectrum to help you sort through some of the stuff that you need and that you don't need. But the secret to anything like this, like I said, is you have a mission. You have something that you want to try and accomplish, and you just need to find the right tools to help you do it. So so that's what we did. That's what I did with this scene earlier. Sort of like a baking show. I already set it up. I'm not going to set it up again because it's not technically a class. I don't want to bore anybody to death with just setting something up from scratch. I just kind of want to give an overview and show you what can be done and get you thinking about, well, what would I do if I could do that? Which is a really good way to learn things, is go, you know what, I'd really like to do something like or this other thing. Or for those of you interested in the anime, it's like, ooh, well, how did they do that? How did that turn out that way? Somebody tells you, and you kind of go, oh, okay, cool, that makes sense. All right, so for the shadows, what I had to do was I set up a shader node, this one called shadow, obviously, and apply image transformation. So that's applying something onto the object that I was wanting to have a shadow come from. And then a quad map, which is basically going to give me, well, I'll show what it gives you in just a sec. And then a peg, which gives me the ability to move things around. So a peg in the node view is basically, imagine you've got your ball and the ball's slippery and you're trying to figure out, well, how could I take that ball and pick it up and throw it across the room? Because it's so slippery, I can't grab it. I can't tell where it starts or finishes. Well, imagine if you had a peg on the side of the ball and all you had to do is reach for that peg, and then now you can flip it, rotate it, spin it, do whatever you want with it, toss it across the room because you've got a handle. So peg is a little bit like a handle that you place onto another node. And it's really cool. I'll just do it right now because it's so fast and easy. If I've got a node set up already, all I have to do is hit Control P and it creates a peg specific to that node. So again, I don't want to go into it too much, but just suffice to say there's all sorts of really cool ways to do stuff. And that's why some of these programs get complicated. But anyway, so it was based on this that I created the shadow that looked basically like a duplicate of the character just standing in space. And then it was up to me to sort out where I should put the thing physically. So there were two elements to it. Let's see if I can get it back to where it was, and then show you a little bit about how that works. All right, so here's the quad map that I was talking about. So this is basically just, if I undo this, see if I can, it's basically just a copy of the character, but I can manipulate the image. So you can see it's sort of like, well, Peter Pan and his shadow. It's a really old reference, I know, but Peter Pan always had this thing where his shadow was separate from him, and he was always chasing it around and trying to figure out how he could make it so it was stuck to him all the time. So Wendy eventually sews his shadow to the base of his foot. Ha ha. Anyway, but so here is a shadow, and you can see I'm just manipulating the corners of this quad map, trying to get it to line up so that it looks like it's connected to his feet. And in order to do that, I had to turn this icon on. So just for the record, there's a show control icon. Again, this isn't a tutorial. I'm just kind of showing you that it does exist. If I undo some of this stuff, get it back to where it was. You can see where it ended up when I did it. It was something like this. And then the shadow itself, grab it. There are all these parameters that you can set. And so first of all, you had to assign an ID to the thing. And it gets a little more technical than I want to get today. So, but here are some parameters. If I just clicked on the shadow itself, some parameters that I could set. And I could change some of the look, set it up where I want it to be on the ground. Then it's a matter of, well, how do I make it look more or less like a shadow? So what if I changed the radius? Let's change it down to something really low. That makes it really hard. You know, you just play around with this a little bit and kind of go, oh, okay, well, I think I liked it softer. That looked really good. And it would look better. Blur type, how blurry, what kind of blur do I want it to have? The radial one, or do I want it to be directional? Directional one looks a little bit harder, so maybe I won't mess with that. And then you could conceivably, I didn't try this, but you could conceivably mess with the color of it. So you can see on screen it's updating. So if I really did want to put in a yellow light and maybe give it a little twinge of yellow or something, I could do that. Again, not really interested in doing that. I did set a color for it that was a little bit dark, a little bit on the darker shade of things, like going for a dark black color or something like that. That's what I ended up with and set for the color. And then you could also mess with the alpha, meaning I can make it a little bit softer that way, so it's not completely opaque, so that it looks like a shadow. It looks like something that's soft and playing against the ground. You know, you'd even think maybe this ground has a surface quality to it, and you know, it's soft enough that you can't see all the edges and details perfectly. So just some things you could play around with. But the main thing is playing around with the edges of the quad map and making sure that they line up so that it is exactly where you want it to be and isn't where you don't want it to be, which can be as important. So I wanted this thing to line up so it matched where his feet were. Otherwise, the illusion that this is the character's shadow is gone. The illusion is lost if it doesn't connect with his feet. And I actually did another version of it where it didn't work out. And it didn't look very good at all. So again, it's a little bit of a hack. I didn't spend a lot of time on this. Often as not, you could probably just do a shadow by drawing a shape underneath the character's body and making a circle, and then painting it and making it a little bit more alpha, a little less opaque, and that would work just fine for shadow as long as it was moving. But it's really nifty, and it was really easy to be able to just take the character itself and lay it on the ground using this quad map, and then play with it a little bit so that it looked like it was a proper shadow, something kind of opaque, a little less opaque rather. So anyway, so that was for the guy. And then the same thing for the monster. So I set these all up at once for the shadows. So it's the same thing. You can see it over here on the in the node view. Here's a peg for manipulating the quad map. The quad map is related to applying transformations, which then goes into a shadow node, which then goes into the main composite. And then outside of that, you also want to have a connection to the original drawing, which in this case was the monster. We'll just call it monster. So the monster goes all the way down to, let's just light it up, makes it easier to see. So the monster goes all the way down to the apply peg transformation, and then the shadow itself is kind of separate. They both go into apply peg transformation, and then they both come out shadow, and then they're both, let's get this out of the way, it's just the background. Then they both go down into the composite node here. And placement of where they go in here does make a difference, as I think I was just showing a minute ago. It's like if you move it left or right inside the composite, then you're going to get different results. Or you might not see your shadow or highlight at all. But anyway, so that was the shadow. Then I did one more for the little wizard guy. Same thing, shadow, and set up the same thing. Peg, quad map, applied transformation. That transformation has a line back to the wizard. So here it is, I call him Wizard Alpha, because again, he's just a piece of glass with the wizard painted on him. You can see, you know, that it's basically just a plate of glass with the wizard painted on it. And that's how that animation works. There is no actual drawing there, it's just an image. But nonetheless, I was able to create the shadow with the peg, quad map, and then the rest. And here you can see, finally it worked. You can see that I can take this shadow and move it around. And you can see a little bit better now if I move it down here, and I can straighten it up a little bit. You'll see it's just the wizard. Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's a little bit odd. It's just a copy of the animation of the wizard. And if I could play this at speed, I can't because it will only render one frame at a time, but I'll go to another frame so you can see the difference. That wasn't a good one. It's also, too, it's keying things on every frame. And so it's really not something that you can show at real time, so it's kind of silly I don't want to get too far into it, but here, we'll just play the actual thing again. You can see the wizard's shadow in the background. It's kind of black in the dark, but you can see it behind his feet. It's just the animation laid down on the ground and then colored black or softened a little bit so that it JD, yeah, it has come along. Well, that's what I was saying to everyone, just to review, is as well. Most of us had a break. Hopefully, you guys were all working really, really hard on your projects, because that's what you do with your spare time, right? That's what I do, right? I'm going to finish my projects and, you know, give them a little bit of zhuzh, as they say, a little bit of After Effectsy sparkle. Anyway, but this is great to see. Thanks. First stop by JD. Yeah, it's done. It's about as done as I'm going to get it anyway. So back to these nodes. So those were the shadow nodes. That was fairly straightforward. And the nice thing is if you successfully pull something like this off, you've got this setup. This is how the setup works. You only need to remember that. Like if you liked this, then that's how it works. The peg, quad map, apply the peg, shadow, make sure that the character's drawing is inserted into the apply peg transformation, you know, just make sure that goes in, and then the rest of it just all goes down into the final composite, which then goes into the display. And that's it. That's a shadow. Now, again, I'm not teaching you how to do this, so it's not like, oh, slow down. No, take CG Spectrum classes and you'll learn how to do this stuff. I just want to show that it is possible, or if you're really quick, you can make notes or do a screenshot of this. It's not a secret. It's nothing like, oh, you got to pay to learn how to do this. You can also look up tutorials on YouTube or whatever. It's just at CG Spectrum, we take the time to go through and make sure you get it. So anyway, enough of that plugging. But anyway, that's the shadows. So then the tones and highlights, a little bit more complicated. And so in order to achieve that, let me find a better frame. Let's go to frame 1. Again, I can't play these at speed when they're rendered out like this. So I'm going to turn this off, turn that off, up here. There we go. So for the character, tones and highlights, what I used was first started with the character himself. So this is the drawing. TVG just means basically it's the drawing itself. And I put the line art and the drawing on the same layer. You can also split them up into separate layers, and that's, oh, I'm not showing my screen here. Let me share my screen with you and you will see that I'm looking at the drawing layer and looking at this character. So a drawing layer can be just the line art. It can also be the line art and the painted art, which is this one. This one, I don't think I split it up into different. Yeah, no, I just painted this character all on one layer. On one of the other layers, or sorry, one of the other characters, the monster in this case, pretty sure I'd split it up into line art, and but I don't have that one isolated, so never mind. Anyway, just take my word for it. You can split things up into line art. You can split them up into character, color art. You can put them all in one. It doesn't matter. In this case, he was all in one. I just thought it'd make life easier. So there is the drawing itself, and then out of that, I created a volume object. And let me see if I can pull this open and show you what the volume object looks like. And that's the thing that got lit. Sounds funny, huh? That it got lit, but yes, it did indeed. Okay, so let's see if I can change this to display all or display one, or see if I can get this thing to display just the characters map. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this. Just take my word for it that it, when it works, it will display the characters as these kind of orangey, green, red map things with sort of beveled edges. And out of that, you can then begin to sort of deduce what you want the shadows to look like. I'll look at one of the other ones before I bail on this, because it looks really cool. But if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. One thing that I've noticed is somebody was asking about, oh, TV Paint versus Toon Boom. I don't intend to say this as a dig or anything, but I have noticed with Toon Boom, with my students, they're mate, and it just doesn't show. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's like you followed all the rules, you did everything that we were supposed to, and it's still not working. And so but often it's not what's happening when I'm doing live streams, is I'm just not thinking, and I don't, then just skip a step, and it's like, oh, well, that's why it's not working, genius. But many times with Toon Boom, it just isn't doing it. And then that happened with Maya a lot when I was learning, and why a lot of people quit when they were learning Maya is, especially if they tried to learn it on their own, things just wouldn't be done. Things just didn't work out the way they did in the tutorial books and things. And unless you had somebody there to help you, it was really torturous to try. I always tell people, when I learned Maya, it was a book this big, full of cracked tutorials, and what the best you got was like you got a little rocket that sails up into the air, and it was really nasty, and I'm not surprised a lot of people didn't survive it in the 2D world. I would urge them to try again now, because things have gotten a little bit better. But anyway, so what I created was a volume object, and then a normal map, and these things are ways of giving definition to your drawing. And then when I zoom in on this a little bit, it'll be easier to see once I start playing around with it. So first things first, I'll look at the volume object. I assigned it a specific ID so that I know that it's only going to affect that particular strain. And then the other characters have different IDs, and then it will affect them differently. Let's see what happens if I change the baseline, the elevation, turn it to 1 or something. Yeah, it doesn't do too much, but you'll see more interesting results in a minute. But so that's just the volume object. Now let's mess with the normal map. That's where the fun starts, I think. So so it's got its ID. I could actually name it, I can name it the Dexter or whatever his name is. But check out when I'm going to change the bevel size. Let's see if that does anything interesting. So there you go. So let's zoom in on a little bit tighter so you can see this. What if I turn it down to 2? Let's see if that does anything interesting. So see how the beveled edge has gotten a lot more thin? And then the higher it gets, let's do a higher number now. See how that looks. So now it's actually filling in a lot more of the character. And what it basically is like a shape that has been assigned to this character based on the outlines, based on the drawings. And then the program just sort of guesses, and then required you to go in there and say, well, how thick do you want this character to be, and what kind of edges do you want it to have? So right now we're just playing with the bevel size. I'll bring it back to about 7, maybe less than that. I think 5 is what I had it at before. That looks pretty good. And then how high do you want it to get elevation wise? So there's 7. So you can see that the tones are moving inwards a little bit. What if we can do something really high? When I am playing around with stuff like this, I always try to break it and see, well, how far is too far? What happens if I take it all the way to 100 or something, and then you go, okay, that's too far. Now let me rein it in and keep playing around with it. And through that process, you begin to see what the thing is actually doing. Let's move it up to something a little bit higher, and then mess around with the elevation smoothness. See if that gives us anything. So that brought it back a little bit. All of these, I mean, it's never going to be a completely volumetric surface, in the sense that you can't, with one button, with one setup, like with one normal map like this and one light hitting it, you're not going to encompass every little detail, the fingers and the hair and the parts of the face. You could always create more nodes and address each one of those pieces individually if you really wanted to get into it. And if you were on a show, if you were doing a real production, you probably would. if this is what you did for a living. But in my case, I just wanted to do a quick down and dirty highlight that made it look like the character's got a highlight on him, that there's a yellow light shining on him, and that was good enough for me. You have all the other things like the bevel multiplier. There you go. So that, you know, if I wanted to be a little softer, not quite as plasticky as it maybe looks when you can see the edges. So see how it's looking very plastic. It's looking, I mean, that's basically what it is. It's been assigned a kind of a plastic volume. This, I thought, just gave the illusion that it was, you know, an actual highlight on the three-dimensional surface of somebody's body. Same with the multiplier. So type in a 7, let's see what that does. That makes it look really plastic and shiny. Why don't we go for it? How far can we take it? 10. So that's 10. So bring it back down to 1, and that's just fine. And then the smoothness multiplier, same thing. It's like, well, what happens if I just break it? So now you can see it. It's a lot softer, but it's also a lot more universal. So it's just one long continuous line down the side of the character. And maybe you don't really want that. Maybe you do. In the case of the monster, I actually did. So anyway, so that was the highlight for this guy. And it was just a matter of playing around with it. And then you have other options, but I didn't use them for this one. So I won't talk about that too much. So that was a normal map. And then, and now I'm getting in trouble here, I don't remember which one's which, but one of these is the light shader that I used with the color. Yeah, so there it is. So there's the reason it has like a yellow edge to it is because I assigned a yellow color to it. So if I were to change that, then it would be red, blue, purple, whatever. You know, the sky's the limit. And I didn't have to paint anything. And that's the thing that I really like about it, is you get this interesting effect. And I did not have to go through and render every single frame with a painted line or create a map around the outside of the edge of the character and then paint it that way. Again, if I wanted it to look perfect, I would have done that. If I wanted it to really have that zing quality. You know, there's a cheesiness to it, that it has this kind of 80s look to it. But again, I embraced it. That's what I was going for with this particular scene anyway, so it doesn't bother me at all. You can mess with the light source. You can mess with the light type. Here's a point light. Let's look at the directional light. The directional light switched the highlight to the other side. And that's why I chose this particular method to do a highlight, is because I thought, well, I can do a highlight on one side and a shadow on the other with the same type of setup. And that's pretty much what I did for this one. Spotlight doesn't do much of anything. So I was happy with the point light, but I could change this source elevation. I could also bring in an actual physical light into the scene and light it that way. I couldn't be bothered with that. Just wanted to get this done. And I was getting the effects I wanted using these limited tools. So shading type, right now it's set to smooth. I could set it to be a little bit more harsh if that was the look I was going for. It wasn't, but you know, that's a look. You definitely could play around with that, and it's sort of like the toon shaded look in Maya. Bias, abruptness, all those things are just things that you'd want to play around with. Surface reflectivity was one that I thought was really interesting, because that's when things start to make a difference. I don't remember what it goes up to, but how shiny is the surface? How specular is it? How much does it receive light and then cast light onto other parts? And just playing around with it. You don't have to know, you know, exactly what it's doing, but look at the difference, you know, with this number between the difference between 50, and then you go, okay, well, now I know what it does, and now I know what I want it to look like in comparison to what it's giving me. And then again, as I said, you have the ability to change the colors and mess with that a little bit. So that was the highlight on this character. And then in order to create a shadow for the character, I thought, well, I'll just do the same thing. I'll just reverse it by using a different type of light. So if I click to open that one up, you can see that I'm using a directional light type. Well, if I change it to point like the other one, now I've got multiple highlights. So you can layer this stuff. You can stack these on top of each other and get all sorts of really cool effects. You just got to play around with it, or check out a cool tutorial. Shouldn't say that. Yeah, but I mean, check out a cool tutorial stream or something. So that's kind of an interesting look. Maybe I could consider using that. But I really wanted to get tones, and while this is giving me tones, they're not that realistic. There's just this flat tone inside the character's body, inside his boots or whatever, feet. And so if I turn it back to directional, now I've got the highlight on one side, and then I've got the tone on the other side. And then I got all these cool little leading edge tones on the character's hair. And so by playing around with those values, like I was doing just a minute ago with the highlights, I was able to come up with something that I thought worked fairly well to make this character look like he's got dimension. And it just took minutes. And to have gone through and done a full tones and highlights pass on this by drawing the whole thing, that would have just been too time prohibitive for the kind of project this is, which is just a silly little thing, fun one-off. So moving along, same thing with the monster. I won't go into it in too much depth because I just went through it at length. But suffice to say, this was a different type of character, and so the results that I got from making it into a 3D lit object, those results came out a lot different too. And in this case, I didn't use a tone shader for both the highlights and the tones. I actually did use a light shader and a tone shader because that was the only way I could get anything at all like what I wanted. So if we look at the light shader, first of all, I chose directional. If I chose point, you can see what happens. So see how this has really gotten plasticky looking. It now looks like a refrigerator magnet or something. And that's because there wasn't a lot of detail in the body of the creature. And so all it's that the program is using is the outside edge and creating this 3D-dimensional shape inside of that outside edge. And then what that's confusing is the inside of the outside. Yeah, right, whatever. But it's creating a 3D object out of something that was a 2D line drawing, and it's doing the best it can. If I really want to go in here and do the pectorals and stuff, either I would draw that, paint it, or I would set up another light system that specifically focuses just on that area of the tentacles or something. But to just do it universally overall like this, this is the results I got when I used a point, so I went back to a directional. And then again, I don't think spot is like I'd create a spotlight and then use it specifically to light specific parts of the character or scene. So for my purposes, a directional highlight worked just fine. I made sure that the shading type was real smooth instead of sharp. If it's sharp, it looked like that. That is definitely not what I was interested in for this scene. But there are certain circumstances where that might be the case. That is maybe what you wanted. But I wanted something smoother. Messed around a little bit with the intensity in this case. So how bright do I want it? Do I want it 100? Do I want it to be 3, in which case you can't even see it? And then just keep going from there. And I eventually stopped at about 75. Same thing with the surface reflectivity. If I turn it all the way up to 100, it doesn't really affect it that much, but you can see that it's starting to blast out a little bit on the tentacle. So I just cranked it down just a little bit so you can't, I was trying to make it so you can't really see the edges too clearly. And then I gave it a color just like I did everything else. Again, I could have colored it anything, but my original goal, as I said before, was that I wanted to have the character's eyes be a light source in the scene and have them glow and give this sort of a phosphorescent look to the character's eyes. Didn't quite have time for that, didn't have the interest in pursuing that, but someday maybe I'll finish that off. And the last thing I did was I turned the alpha down on it, so that instead of being really hard, it's got kind of a soft quality to it, but really it's really just sort of an on-off. Thanks, JD. Happy New Year to you too. Nice to see you again. Hope all is going well in your world. And always a pleasure. So here is, yeah, the alpha was just basically an on-off situation. So I would dampen the alpha-ness of it in other ways if I cared that much about it. But that was the highlight, and then the tone was something similar, but I just use a tone shader instead. And again, played around with this. What would happen if I used a spotlight instead? Well, let's see. Well, it didn't do too much. I'd have to move the light around and do all sorts of crazy things. And then what if I used the point light? Same thing. Didn't really get much. So I started with a directional light and then just played with not only the parameters inside of here, but I also played with this thing called a multiplier. You can really see now, see how that's a three-dimensional object that's been lit, but it's sort of like a refrigerator magnet or something. I don't really know how else to describe it, but you can really see the edges. In fact, let's see if I can make it really, really harsh. So you can see what I'm working with here, that it's a two-dimensional drawing that's kind of been extruded and turned into something that's 3D and then lit with that. And so that was the multiplier. I wonder how high it goes. Yeah, it's getting really nasty, huh? But you just got to kind of play around with it. And then I played with the original parameters inside the normal map as well, and messed around with the elevation of the monster's skin quality, and tried to get that to look something a little bit softer than it did initially. So I felt pretty good about the head. Thought that this leading edge of the tone around the head for something that takes 5 minutes to set up and then ends up giving this thing dimension in ways I never would have imagined. It's like it's not bad. And then the rest, you just have to get artistic with it and play around with it a little bit more. And then last but not least, there was this guy. So this was the real surprise, the real funny one, because again, this is not a drawing. This was a drawing that I did in Toon Boom in another scene and then exported as the equivalent of, thanks, Classics, 87, thank you. This was just, like I showed you earlier, this is like a painting on a piece of glass. There are no real parameters to this. So I was really amazed that Toon Boom was able to handle it. At first I didn't think it would. I just thought, oh, there's no way program's gonna be able to sort out the character from this, because the details aren't included. It's just a final composited image, not a bunch of different, but it did just fine. So if I take let's try the tone shader and mess around with that just like I was doing a minute ago, if I turn the multiplier up really high. So that's what it did. It did turn it into a blob. You can see like it tried to make the star into something 3D. It didn't do so well with the nose. The hat, it's not real crisp and clean like with the other drawings I did, but it did do it. It did create a three-dimensional object out of this painting on a sheet of glass, essentially. And then once that was accomplished, it was just a matter of trying to find the right values so that I could make this look like it had shadows and highlights to it. So that's why this one's just a little bit more smeary, a little bit softer, a little bit not quite as defined. If you look at the shadows here, they're very clean on the green thing and on the little guy. But on the wizard, it's a little bit mushier, a little softer. But when you consider what it's calculating, it's actually pretty incredible, at least to me. These are sorts of things that growing up I dreamed of being able to do, but just there was no hope in the world. Like I said, Roger Rabbit was the most incredible thing that most of us had ever seen at that point in 1980 something, 88, 89. And the idea that you can now with a button do what we would spend hours and hours and hours trying to do with multiple passes of film, even if it doesn't look as stellar as the original, you can still do it that way. You can still go back and do tones and highlights the traditional way. And I think Klaus did a little bit more of that than this method, but I think they did this too. I haven't gotten too much into it, but anyway, but it's just amazing that you can actually do this. It makes this program worth every penny. And if you really set your mind to it, you can come up with some spectacular results. And like I said, I'm going to be messing around with less complicated scene from the standpoint of animation, so I can finish it a little faster, and then apply some of this glitzy stuff and see if I can come up with something short, sweet, fast, and not necessarily that smooth, but hopefully it'll have a lot of sparkle quality to it, and you guys will enjoy watching it come together quickly. But anyway, so that was the shadows. Same thing with the light. So the light shader, the tone shadows, that was just the dark side, and then the light, same thing, you know, working with something that's got kind of a blobby nature to it. So if I turn the shadows to sharp, you'll see it. It's kind of messy, you know. The program was doing its best trying to calculate what goes where as far as the light hitting this 2D flat object that that I'm asking to make into a 3D object. But all things being equal, it did a really nice job. And I could probably even play around with beveling and the size and shape of the bevel more and get even better results. But I was pretty impressed, and I was also getting sick of it. So, so I was happy with this. That's a pleasant little glow, and it looks just fine. And then, like I said, then I place them into the composited background, or the background that was already set up, and you can't look at it when it's rendered, so I go back to my working version of it. The drawing version, you can see individual characters, so we'll start with that. You can't see it playing at speed. Anyway, so let's look at just, so this is what I had originally done. This is just the characters painted with no shadow. I love that they've got shadows, but they don't have tones and highlights. Let's get this out of the way. So 3 characters, and you know, once I'd had them in the scene, I was able to move them around at will. If I wanted to take one of the characters and just go, oh, I want you to be up here. And you can see now, by the way, you can see the character's details. You only see the actual full shadow when you see the rendered version. But so it's basically just a copy of the character that's been laid flat on the ground. But anyway, I could move the characters around, rotate them from a specific point. So rotate them from his chest or something. I could animate them this way so that they're actually moving through the scene. I thought about making it so that this guy jumps forward instead of just jumping in place. It's kind of silly that he just kind of goes, ta-da, I do a circle and then I stab. And it's like, it's got nothing to do with the creature, right? So I thought, oh, it might be fun if he actually, as he's jumping, he jumps forward into the character instead of just jumping in place. But I don't know, didn't really care too much about that. So again, I might come back to this and tweak it some more at another place, another point. But anyway, there is all 3 characters, and they're all doing their thing. And then I added the tones and highlights, which you can only see if I render out individual frames. So that's what it looked like. You know, I just checked it a couple times. Then I rendered the whole thing out as a movie. So I just went to File, Export, make a movie out of it. You have to set some parameters in there, frame length, other things. And once I did that, then I had the movie version. And then I put it into After Effects. And that is, again, how I came up with the little sparkles that the character has. If you know After Effects at all, then you're probably not all that impressed by that, because it is really basic particle effects. It's equivalent of like when you get Photoshop for the first time and you see that you can put lens flares, which, by the way, After Effects has too, is these generic lens flares. And you kind of go, oh, I'm going to put lens flares all over everything. And then somebody looks at your work and goes, oh, using generic lens flares, are you? Oh, how clever. And you kind of go, oh, wow, I thought it was cool. Well, yeah, it was cool to all of us the first time we saw it. I'm not knocking it. I think you should definitely play around with these things. But it just as I was saying earlier, probably at the beginning of today, was if something is easy, that means it's easy for everyone to do it, and everyone will do it, and they will make it so that it's not impressive anymore. So the first time anybody sees particle effects, they're just like, ooh, sparkly, oh, pretty. And then after you've seen it and know how it's done, then you no longer think it's all that cool anymore. And you go, oh, you just kind of set a particle producer, tweak some parameters, and put it in your scene and call it a day, huh? And yeah, it looks like it. So if I really wanted to impress anybody, I probably would go back and do something more with this. But I just thought, I'd give a little bit of finesse. So I imported this entire scene into After Effects and then added a effects producer, attached it to his hand, a couple frames, and then had it sail off around. I had this idea of maybe having it sail around and do something really funny, but again, the scene ended and it was enough already. So anyway, so that is, in essence, everything I'm going to do to this scene. The last thing that I'll finish up with talking about these scenes is that you never really come to an end with this stuff. That there's always something more that you could do to it. I'm going to actually just leave it on the working window for a minute. There's always something more that you could do to a scene, and I've talked about this many times before. In fact, right before the break, I talked about this. It's like, how do you know when your scene is done? How do you know when you're finished with it? And there are a number of different ways that you know. One of the ways is if you're working on a job, then your boss or your supervisor or your client or whoever takes it away from you and says, you are done because I'm done paying you, and because we don't want to have you working on this, there are other things that we need you to do. And so please get to those things now. So that's one way that you know when you're done with something. Another way that you know that you're done with something is when you show your work to someone and they don't have any suggestions. They look at your work and they go, oh, wow, that's really nice, nicely done. So the music to anybody who works in production, it's music to anybody's ears when your supervisor, director, client looks at your work and kind of goes, okay, yeah, nice. And that's how you know that you don't have to work on that scene anymore and you're on to the next one and everything's great. But another thing that happens is that you don't feel like you're done with your scene and you're actually really into it and really excited and you want to finish it off to a certain level, and whoever's in charge of the scene says to you, it's like, no, you're done. I'm taking this from you and you're moving on to the next one. And you're like, wait just a minute. I don't want to be done with this yet. Can I work on it some more? And they go, no. And so that's another way that you know when you're done with a scene. So it's, a couple different ways you know, and one of them is when someone takes it away from you. Another one is when you could neither take anything away or add anything to your scene, and you know that it's working. And so I can hand this scene, go back to the finished one. Now, I could hand this off to someone who doesn't know anything about animation, and they probably would think it was amazing. And then I could hand it off to somebody who really does know animation, and they'd say, oh, well, you did this, you did that, you could have fixed that, could have fixed that, I would tweak this, that isn't working as well as I think you wanted it to. So, it just depends kind of on who your audience is, and also too, like, is this a scene that would work really well in an anime show? Probably not. Is it something that would work good in a space-based video game? More likely. That was what I designed it to do, and that's kind of the direction I was going in. So you kind of have to know your audience as well, and then they will tell you when they think that something's done based on their approval of it. It's like, yes, that looks like what you set out to do. And even if somebody has suggestions and they're like, oh, yes, I would definitely work on those tones and highlights, or that's a dead giveaway, or any number of things someone could say. It's like, yeah, but you did it, you accomplished it, it's fun, I was entertained, I thought it was interesting looking, it made me laugh, or whatever response that you get for something. And so on that sense, it was successful. But in my humble opinion, the difference between success and something being finished is a pretty wide chasm. I set out to do something, I did it, it worked, I'm happy with it, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to move on and learn something else. That was a success. It was successful because I did everything that I set out to do. On the other side is this is a finished scene that could get me a job or could be scene in a feature film or in a game, or some arena where a level of expertise is expected, and where they're not going to be quite as forgiving if you didn't take it that extra little bit into the realm of finishing. And so that's two different things. Finishing is one thing, and being successful is something else. A project can be successful and not be finished, and a project can be finished and not be successful. But they're two different philosophies that don't always jibe well together. And so when you're working on your own projects and you're making decisions about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, you have to determine, well, what will be successful in my terms? What is it that I will be able to look at my work and go, okay, it's done. It's successful. I did what I want to do with it, and now I can move on and do something else, to start a new project, or build this into something that's a bigger project. That when you're doing your own projects, when you're making your own short films, or whatever it is that you're doing on for yourself, or just throwing stuff out there into the universe, and you don't care what the response is, that's different than you're trying to please a client, you're trying to please a director, a supervisor, or anybody specific that you're working with. And that's, in my mind, when it becomes really important that you are able to step away from things and look at your work objectively, look at other people's work objectively, and not get caught up in sort of a rose-colored glasses view of your own abilities and your own skill levels. Because if you don't have the ability to do that, it's going to get really scary. It's really tough to go out into the world and have people criticize your work when you didn't see that coming, when you didn't expect that that was how your work was going to be treated. And so I offer that up to anybody who's out there looking for something, looking for something to get involved in. Are you trying to get a job? Are you trying to put together a portfolio, making a reel? Well, think about your audience. Think about what success means to you. Think about how your work is going to be received, and use that as a guide to tailor your work to whatever end that you want to use it for. And there's nothing wrong with making lots and lots of projects and not sharing them with people because you still feel like you're learning and growing, and you don't feel like your work is something that needs to be shared. There's also something to be said about sharing stuff, because that's the only way you can grow and evolve. And unless you get some comments from others, you're not likely to learn how to see things in a way that the professionals see things. And I know for a fact that after spending several years at Disney, DreamWorks, and equivalent studios, where people who worked at that level worked, even though if they weren't at those studios, that I began to get an eye for what was professional, what was really a lot of thought put into it, and what was pretending to be professional and pretending to be successful in terms of the high bar that a place like Disney has or DreamWorks has. It took me a while before I was able to see the difference and be able to incorporate that into my own work and go, I know that my stuff hasn't quite reached that level with this particular project, whatever it is. And so I need to go back to the drawing board and need to work on it some more and get it to that level. And if I'm not able to get it to that level, then I have to keep trying until I do, because that was what I wanted. I wanted to be able to work at those studios. So for your own work, you have to do the same thing. And so I highly recommend sharing your work with people, even if they thump you now and then. I recommend comparing your work to others and saying, well, how do I fit in? Can I do that? If I can't do that, why can they do it? And how come I can't? Did they take classes? Do they have a natural ability? Are they watching specific things and copying what they see? And I just don't know what those things are. All those things are valid ways to help yourself evolve and grow, so that you can eventually get to a point where, as one person said to me, where it looks effortless. Early on in my career, one of the animators I knew, he said, I want my stuff to look effortless. When people watch my work, I want them to not think that I spent hours and hours and hours putting it together, making it look the way it does, but that it just looks like it just happened. And so I could probably show this thing to someone, and someone somewhere would look at it and just be like, oh wow, what button did you push to do that? How many, was it 2, maybe 3 hours? It's like, no, it just took me a really long time to put this together. Again, I didn't work on it all day every day, but somebody who's trained and professional knows. It's like, oh yeah, I see the work that you put into this, and I see where you didn't put work into it too, when we could have. But that's what you want to try and train yourself to be able to do, is know the difference and be able to cater your work to a specific audience so that their expectations are met, and so that you can get the job that you want, or get the sort of peer review that you want, the online presence you want, if that's what you're going for. That's it's as valid as anything else. But a part, as much as anything that you're trying to develop, it's your eye and your ability to see the difference. And so just keep on progressing through your projects, and when you finish one, start up another one, and be sure and finish them. I've said this many times in past streams, but don't abandon your projects. Look at this one, the wizard. I started many years ago. I won't say how long, but I started it many years ago. I dreamed one day it might look like it does right now, or maybe better, but I had hopes that one day I would finish it to the level that I have finally finished it many years later. I don't know whether it's just pure stubbornness, or if it's creative ambition, or what, but I was determined that I would finish this thing off one day, and I finally did. And there it is. And then the other two I didn't spend nearly as much time on, but I did work on this for a long time, as anyone who's been coming back here can testify. And I'm happy with how it turned out, and I'm ready to move on to something else, and put this one aside and keep going, as everyone else should do. So that we're getting to the end of another stream. It's been fun hanging out. Bring back my friend, the purple thing. It's been fun hanging out with you guys. Thank you for commenting. Thank you for watching, as always. As always, too, please be sure and check out some of the other streams that CG Spectrum has to offer. There are all sorts of topics available. You can check those out on the website, or on whatever platform you're currently watching this on. But please do be sure and check out CG Spectrum, the website, if you're interested in learning how to do some of this fun stuff, or just want to talk to somebody about more about what classes entail, and how you might be able to get involved with it. Just head on over to cgspectrum.com. But that's me for this week. I will be back here next week, same time, same place. Like I said, starting a new scene, if all goes according to plan, for next week, that I think you guys are going to enjoy. And back to drawing, and talking about drawing and setting up scenes, and how you start things off. And as always, I love fielding your questions. If you have anything you want to say, or anything you want to ask, anything you'd like me to talk about in future streams, please feel free to let me know. But otherwise, this is Scott Claus for CG Spectrum, signing off. Have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, and once again, Happy New Year. I hope it's a good one. I'm sure it will be. All right, take care, and see you next time.